Alex, thank you for those wonderful remarks and that introduction. I don't know whether I deserve them or not, but thank you in any event. Honored guests, dear faculty, and students. The Holodomor, in the winter and spring of 1933, and the repression of the Ukrainian intellectual and political class in the months that followed brought about the Sovietization of Ukraine, the destruction of the Ukrainian national idea, and the neutering of any Ukrainian challenge to Soviet unity. Raphael Lemkin, the Polish Jewish attorney who invented the word genocide, spoke of Ukraine in this era as the classic example of his concept. Quote, "It is the case of genocide, of destruction, not of individuals only, but of a culture and a nation," unquote. The preceding statement describes a conclusion about the Ukrainian famine genocide, or Holodomor, from Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine, a book written by award-winning author Anne Applebaum in a manuscript that illuminated the unfathomable horrors of Stalin's brutal destruction of the Ukrainian nation. Holodomor. That term in itself conjures images and words of sheer beastliness. It's wild, it's horrific, irresponsible, immoral, it's violent. For generations, Ukrainians have brought this reality to those who would listen. But today, the intensity of concern and the level of fear that history will be forgotten seems deeper than ever. One of the biggest challenges facing greater awareness and genocide recognition of the Ukrainian Holodomor is the evil act of Russian disinformation. Massive resistance and denial of the Holodomor were commonplace during Soviet times, as depicted by infamous New York Times correspondent Walter Duranty. A Pulitzer Prize winner for his series of articles about the glories of the Soviet state the year before the Holodomor, Duranty failed to acknowledge the Holodomor as it was ravaging the countryside in Ukraine. In fact, in a memorandum to the United States Secretary of State by U.S. diplomat A.W. Clifford, stationed in Berlin in 1932, he denotes a conversation with Walter Duranty and concluded the following, quote, "In agreement with the New York Times and the Soviet authorities, his," meaning Duranty's, "official dispatches always reflect the official opinion of the Soviet state and not his own," unquote. That pervasive threat of reality as it regards the Holodomor disinformation continues in today's Russia. Through the Kremlin's propaganda and psychological operations are sophisticated and effective, we are now living in a different time and in a different place. In fact, a phrase within the 2017 major motion picture, Bitter Harvest, speaks volumes to Moscow's intent regarding the war. Reality is the enemy. Our understanding of that phrase, of that stark reality, is made all the more clear in an assessment by the Consul General of Italy, who reported from the capital of Ukraine in 1933 that Moscow engineered its starvation of Ukrainians, quote, "to dispose of the Ukrainian problem." The Italian consul quoted a top KGB officer that the purpose was to, quote, "change the ethnographic materials of Ukraine by massively resettling Russians into a cleansed Ukraine." The Kremlin's goal, said the KGB officer, was to dispose of the Ukrainian problem within a few months at a cost of between 10 to 15 million souls, unquote. Could we probably add to these cynical admissions of Stalin's emissary in Ukraine? it is perfectly clear why Stalin and the Central Committee of the Communist Party organized the fearful genocide in Ukraine. It was the pogrom of pogroms. Extensive reports about the unprecedented famine in Ukraine appeared in American, Canadian, British, French, Belgian, and German press. For instance, Malcolm Muggeridge, the noted British journalist who was an enthusiastic supporter of the USSR until his trip to the Soviet Union, wrote the following. In the course of my trip in Ukraine, I gradually realized that there was a merciless war being waged by the Soviet government against the peasants. The battlefield is truly ruined, but the struggle is going on. One can see on the one hand the million of peasants dying of hunger, and on the other hand, the soldiery of the KGB implementing the orders of the proletarian dictatorship. They have thrown themselves upon Ukraine as famished vultures. Everything that is edible is either taken away or destroyed. They have executed and deported millions of peasants, sometimes entire villages. Thus, they have succeeded in transforming the richest country in the world to a desert full of melancholy, unquote. But the remembrance of the Holodomor is not, however, simply a Ukrainian issue. It is a worldwide issue. It is an American issue. America's long-standing role as the foremost champion of human rights in the world makes Washington, D.C. the best location for a recently dedicated memorial to this tragedy. U.S. Representative Sander Levin, sponsor of the congressional legislation, remarked during the dedication ceremonies in November 2015. Only through remembrance and recognition can we stop such acts of senseless cruelty and violence against humankind from happening again, unquote. And the recent passage of the Holodomor as genocide by the United States Senate and House of Representatives and proclamations by nearly 25 states nationwide in 2018 evokes recognition to its highest caliber, morality and truth. Let us be cognizant of the fact that recognition is about the future. It is about the next generation. Several weeks ago, in testimony before the Joint Education Committee of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I related why the study of Holodomor curriculum is relevant and important. Such bills are about the future education of our children. How better to empower the students and recognize their aspirations and hopes than to hear from them directly. Recently, a group of students was fortunate enough to read information about the Ukrainian genocide of 1932-33 for the first time. In their words, not in any words of experts or government officials, can one understand the depth of their conviction to learn the truth. Josh remarks on learning of the Holodomor, quote, "The horror of this tragedy is still not widely known. In fact, I have to admit my ignorance of this until taking this class. The fact that I, at my age, have never heard of this tragedy shows that there is a problem in the teaching of history in this country," unquote. And Amy comments, "What happened in Ukraine in the beginning of the 1930s was a horrible tragedy that should never be forgotten. It is a tragedy in itself that many people are not even aware that it occurred. It even angered me. How is it that it is not even mentioned in our history classes? How are we supposed to have a better future when we don't learn from and remember our mistakes from the past?" Unquote. Yes, sadly, the world as we know it today, through the various mediums of communications, is not the world of yesteryear, whereby slogans such as "food as a weapon," as expressed by Stalin's former Commissar for Foreign Affairs, Maxim Litvinov, describe the ends to a means in physically starving to death as many as 7 to 10 million innocent Ukrainian men, women, and children between the years of 1932-33 for their only true crime being Ukrainian. Food continues to be used as a political weapon. Apathy and ignorance of history will ensure that the mistakes of the past will be repeated. It is not enough, however, to speak of crimes against humanity, of genocide, and of famine in the abstract. We must cite specific events, such as the Ukrainian genocide, the Holodomor, in order to put a human face on such crimes. To do otherwise, to dismiss the murders of millions, would be nothing more than a mere statistic. So today, and every day, we are here to keep their memory alive. We are here to pass the torch along from one generation to another and inspire the youngest to stand firmly in honor and memorialize the millions who needlessly suffered at the hands of a dictator. Only through our constant vigilance will the world finally know the truth about the Ukrainian Holodomor. Our uniting theme as we work together to expand worldwide awareness and recognition of this terrible tragedy is quite clear. Ukraine remembers, the world acknowledges, and the march goes on. Thank you for your attention.